Law Talk. I think I got a pretty fascinating conversation for you guys today. It's something that we as trial lawyers and judges and people that are in the courtroom that handle criminal law and true crime cases really don't have a big handle on, and that is after the case is resolved and a person is convicted and they go to jail, what is it really like? You get some anecdotal stories, but you never really get it down and pin it down with the expert ability of somebody that I recently had the honor of when I was interviewing, and that's Julio Briones. I see actually Julio's on, as well as my wife. And I think Julio, who now has a consulting business and has written a couple of books and lectures to the Bar Association and helps government officials talk about prison reform, was a great resource for us to understand this big mystery, which can be a little counterintuitive in my mind from the way the public may perceive it. So on the Law Crime Network recently, we covered three major national cases that you may remember. One was the VanDyke trial. That was the Chicago police officer who shot and killed Laquan McDonald. I believe he was 16 or 17 at the time, shot him 16 times in an incident that was kind of unfolding rather rapidly. He was convicted of murder in Chicago, VanDyke, who again was a former police officer. And the other one was the Christopher Watts case. And this was the case where Christopher Watts killed his wife, who was 15 weeks pregnant, and took his two beautiful daughters, 3 and 4 years old, Celeste and Bella, killed them, smothered them, strangled them, and then disposed of their bodies in separate drums of crude oil and water, and then later feigned that they were either kidnapped or whatever, and he was trying to look for them when in fact he was the killer. He recently pled guilty. They took it out of the death penalty and gave him multiple life without parole sentences. That's the Chris Watts case. And the other one is the case we most recently covered on Law and Crime Trial Network, which is the Denise Williams case. Now, I don't want to get too deep into the flesh of this case, but it's really twisty. It's a real betrayal. She basically started having an affair with her husband's best friend, and ultimately those two that were cheating on Mike Williams, Denise Williams planned and plotted his murder with a man, Brian Winchester. That's her paramour. Winchester brought him out on a boat, threw him into water and a supposed duck hunting trip. And then when he wasn't drowning, he shot him in the face and killed him. Denise Williams was, we should know that Brian Winchester testified on behalf of the state for immunity, so he did not have to answer for the crime, although he was the person who actually shot and killed Mike Williams. The wife, Denise Williams, went on trial for murder and was convicted. So here was the question to Julio. What is it like for them in prison? What are they going to be facing? And then I'm going to have a very interesting, what I believe to be social criminal justice question for you folks at the end that I'd be dying to know your opinion. So here are some basic broad strokes that Julio basically advised us of. With VanDyke, who was the police officer convicted of killing the young man, having shot him 16 times, he's got 3 strikes against him. He's white, he's a police officer, and if it is true that Laquan McDonald was a gang member, then his life is in serious, serious jeopardy on that basis alone. As Julio indicated, there'll be a green light or a term similar to that, kill on sight. I forget the exact term that Julio used, where if in fact he was a gang member, VanDyke's life is in serious jeopardy, in addition to those other reasons. And he gives how they do it. Well, if they're in protective custody or they're in isolation, how is it possible? And he talks about how the trustees of the prison, those are the prisoners that are trustees, can do things like put infected blood that has hepatitis or HIV in the food. No matter what you try to do, they can get to them if they want to, and they've got nothing but time on their hands to cogitate this. Now, I put in my title for this strict moral code of prisoners, because Julio talks about this. He says just because they're in prison, don't think there's no morality, that there is a strict moral code there. So there's how he broke the VanDyke case down. Now let's look at Chris Watts. Again, that was the guy who killed his wife, 15 weeks pregnant, and his 2 baby daughters. He has recently been removed to an undisclosed location because his life is in jeopardy already. And what Julio called him was, quote, dead man walking. So they're going to look at this as so heinous and so offensive, and that part of that strict moral code is kind of like the old mafia stuff, no women and no children, and that exists in the prison as well. And he basically called his life less than meaningless, Chris Watts, and he'll be tortured by staff and prisoners. Now, what I found fascinating about Julio's analysis is, I said, between the two, between VanDyke and Chris Watts, who is going to have the more difficult time in prison? And he basically, Julio said, it comes down to whether, again, that crucial question on the VanDyke case as to whether Laquan McDonald, the victim, was a gang member or not. And if he was, VanDyke is more likely to be taken out quicker than Chris Watts. If not, if Laquan McDonald was not a gang member, he believes that Christopher Watts is going to be the one in the greatest jeopardy. But here's what I found really interesting, because this was surprising to me, on Denise Williams. He basically said that she's going to be, if she plays it right, the victim, that she was a victim of domestic violence, and that there's going to be some level of sympathy for her in her presentation of the case. But the person, and I wasn't even thinking about this, it's going to have the most difficult time is Brian Winchester. And, you know, when he said it, Julio, it rang and resonated with me, because here's the quote that Julio said: "You don't use your woman as a shield." That's part of that strict moral code of the prisoners. And at the same time, because Brian Winchester testified against her and got her convicted, the prisoners will see Brian Winchester both as a, quote, rat as well as a coward. So those are the really, really interesting permutations of what prison life can be like. Julio, on a previous episode, you can find it on my Bianchi Law Talk on my YouTube channel, as well as the link that I have here in the description of this. It starts around the 7-minute mark, where we start breaking these cases down. You can hear Julio's full description of what life will be like as a prisoner in these 3 fascinating cases that we covered on the Law and Crime Network. So here's my criminal law social justice question. As prosecutors who get to make plea offers, or as a judge who ultimately is responsible for the sentencing, should they take into consideration the kind of time a person is going to do, the likelihood of serious bodily harm, or otherwise? Now, I know some people will say, there's undoubtedly people will start posting on my social media when I put this out, who cares, let them all burn in hell. Well, not everybody felt that way with the Jason VanDyke trial. Substantial amount of people that were blogging during that and were saying that he was making split-second decisions, and you know, he didn't wake up that day meaning to kill him, which is different than Denise Williams, which is different than Chris Watts. But nevertheless, Julio indicates that if Laquan McDonald were in fact a gang member, and because he's a police officer and because he's white, he is going to be spending a much more difficult time and likely to be taken out because of those factors. So should we as prosecutors and judges take that into consideration when we're fashioning a sentence? Should we lower the sentence a little bit? Should we use our discretion, which we're allowed to do, to say, hey, you know what, 5 years for this guy is like 10 years, or is like 10 years really. So let's take it down a little bit. So, you know, he's going to be dealing with a really difficult time. It's an interesting question, and it's one that prosecutors ask many, many times. You know, what kind of time is the person going to do? And some people could argue, well, that's just not fair. A crime is a crime, and irrespective of who you are, if you commit it, you should be getting the same kind of sentence as everyone else. And that's a fair enough criminal justice response as well. I see Julio put down 1 in 28 could be arrested. Being so callous could backfire. Conditions should definitely be considered. So, you know, there you go from Julio. And listen, I love Julio because he's a guy who speaks from experience. You know, he has a fascinating story to tell. He's actually been in prison for a singular event on a singular night. Has a really harrowing criminal justice story about the very poor lawyering and poor representation, and was able to, you know, through very tenacious work as a paralegal in the jail, extradite himself from that situation, from the very, very bad scenario he was in. So Julio has no better perspective, especially now as a consultant, to tell people, and I found that very interesting, that he believes that these factors should be taken into consideration. So what are your thoughts? Should, do you feel like Julio does, that VanDyke should be in greater jeopardy if Laquan McDonald's a gang member? To me, Chris Watts, no matter how you add it up, is one of the most heinous crimes I've ever seen. And Denise Williams and Brian Winchester, what do you think about that idea that he used his woman as a shield to get himself out of it, and the prisoners aren't going to like that? I'd like to know your opinion. And guys, listen, if you could share these videos, I greatly appreciate it. And I'm making a big push to subscribe to my new YouTube channel on Bianchi Law Talk. So if you guys could go to YouTube and hit that subscribe button and start sharing these videos, I would greatly appreciate it. And for all you who celebrate Christmas, I wish you all a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. I'll be back next Sunday, 5 o'clock, for another Bianchi Law Talk. Thank you.